Yes, Scherete. I'm the Roman Orthodox, but you can call me Roman or Magister Romanus. Either way, it's up to you. And if you can't tell, I have my camera sitting on my lap right now because, well, I just had a newborn, and pretty much every square inch of my house is covered in baby things. Which brings up an interesting point, by the way. If you haven't checked out the GoFundMe for baby Poppy's baptism, you can check out that link in the description. There's obviously no obligation, or I don't want to sort of put on you any feeling that you have to donate, but we'd really appreciate it, especially with the time that I put into these videos. So if you want to check out that link, it's in the description below. Okay, on to the topic for today. Pretty much on almost every one of my videos, someone makes the comment when I talk about liturgy, especially, or things that attracted me to the Eastern Orthodox Church. They say, well, why didn't you just become Eastern Catholic? And so everybody asks this question. And I've been trying to think about the best way to answer that question. And so that's what this video is about, why I chose to become Eastern Orthodox rather than Eastern Catholic. I want to put a few caveats on this video. So first of all, as I often repeat, I'm just a traditionalist Catholic that became Orthodox. I have a little background in classical languages and medieval philosophy, but that's pretty much it. I am not theology trained, and so this is not any kind of official Orthodox doctrine that you're going to hear on this channel. This is why I chose to become Eastern Orthodox rather than Eastern Catholic. So take it with a grain of salt, take it as you will, listen to my experience. The second point is I actually have some experience with Eastern Catholics. So I have several friends that are Eastern Catholic. I went to an Eastern Catholic church, I think once or twice. So, I greatly respect my Eastern Catholic friends. I greatly respect their traditions. And I just want to say that this video is not an attack video on Eastern Catholicism. It's more of why I didn't choose to go down that path. So I just want to say that out there. Or put that out there for all of you before I get started on this. So let's go back into background that if you've watched my previous videos, you already know. I was a traditionalist Catholic, originally a convert to traditionalist Catholicism from the Southern Baptist faith. And I ended up becoming traditionalist Catholic by way of the Novus Ordo. So I actually joined the Catholic Church through a pretty standard run-of-the-mill parish. In fact, that parish was slightly left of center while I was at college. And during that whole conversion process, I actually had the chance to be exposed to a lot of Catholics from different backgrounds, including Eastern Catholics. That meant I visited an Eastern Catholic church, and I sort of had to make a decision. Okay, am I going to be Eastern Catholic, and am I going to go to a traditionalist church, or am I going to be? I hear a baby in the background, but don't worry, her mommy's going to get her. So back to the video. So during that whole time, I had the chance to get acquainted with traditionalist Catholics, with Eastern Catholicism. And eventually I started primarily attending the traditional Latin Mass, rather than the Novus Ordo, rather than an Eastern Catholic church. After I joined the Catholic Church at that sort of run-of-the-mill, left-of-center parish, I started attending the Latin Mass pretty much exclusively. And I want to give a shout out right here to Sacred Heart of Jesus Parish in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That's an awesome traditionalist Catholic parish, and that was where I attended pretty much all through college. So, and it's a beautiful church too, by the way. So that's where I went. And then when I came back to my home state, I went to the local traditionalist parish and participated there. one of the neat things about converting in college is that you get exposed to a lot of different ideas. And Eastern Catholicism was one of them. I did, as I just said, attend an Eastern Catholic Divine Liturgy. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't really like it, at least not compared with the traditional Latin Mass. It seemed noisy compared to a traditional Latin Mass. It seemed kind of nebulous, irrational. And, I was all about Western philosophy back then. And, the repetition of Lord have mercy so many times during the Divine Liturgy, it just wasn't something that really attracted me to that particular faith. So you can understand why I didn't end up being Eastern Orthodox back then. Like, I was attracted to Catholicism, and specifically traditionalist Catholicism at the time. My mind later changed after I converted. But, that was where I was back then. When I started questioning Catholicism a few years ago, my initial reason for questioning Catholicism really had nothing to do with the liturgy. So, just going from Eastern Orthodox to Eastern Catholic, or switching to Eastern Catholic, that really didn't solve anything for me. It was primarily that I was concerned about the ecclesiology of the Catholic Church. What should the church look like? Is it meant to be a monarchy with the Pope at the top instead of Christ, or in the place of Christ, however you want to put it? Or is it meant to be, to use a term that is way overused in the Catholic Church today, is it meant to be synodal? That is it meant to be, the bishops as a group together? Pardon my burnt hand, by the way. I apologize. I just flashed that on camera for you. A little bit of a cooking accident there. So anyway, is the church meant to be a monarchy, or is it meant to be a synodality? Is it meant to be conciliar? And here is where, when I concluded that the original church was synodal in nature, Eastern Catholicism sort of really didn't scratch that itch that I had for a church that was more synodal, that was less monarchical, that was more decentralized, that was more focused on tradition than on having a set hierarchical structure. Now, a little bit about me. I am a lawyer by trade, and an administrative lawyer by specialty. So, and by the way, don't take anything that I'm about to say as legal advice. Be sure to consult your own attorney. Anyway, so I'm an administrative lawyer by specialty. And in administrative law, one of the questions that we're always asking is, okay, if, an agency, let's say the FDA, is trying to make a new regulation about something, what law passed by Congress or provision in the Constitution allows that agency to make regulations? In other words, what is the law that gives authority to these agencies? Now, if you're talking about, just to use an analogy, that is not how we analyze the difference between federal government and state government. The federal government doesn't give power to the states. The states have it, and the Constitution gives certain powers to the federal government, right? So you don't ask, when a state makes a law, well, who gave that state the power to make the law? You ask, is that law itself constitutional, right? So it's two different questions, right? In administrative law, you ask, what law allows you to make this regulation? If you're looking at state law, right, individual states making law, you look at whether what they're doing is in accordance with the Constitution, and also, of course, with federal laws that they can't conflict with federal laws. Anyway, not to go down that rabbit hole. But anyway, I'm always thinking about that. What is the law that allows, or what are the sets of rules that allow a body to continue making rules? Okay. Now, in the Orthodox Church, that answer is pretty much from the early church. It's conciliar decisions. It's the ecumenical councils that established certain patriarchates or autocephalous churches, some of which are not patriarchates, but the ecumenical councils, and then the individual local churches, right, are what are the source for canon law in the Orthodox Church, right? This is how local churches make rules. It's in accordance with ecumenical councils, and that doesn't change, right? That any local Orthodox church will at least theoretically claim to follow Orthodox canon law, or to form its rules based on Orthodox canon law, which again comes from councils, not from any particular person, or especially not from a decision by the old patriarch of Rome. Okay, what about Eastern Catholic churches? Well, actually, Eastern Catholic churches primarily derive their lawmaking power from a code of canon law that was created for them, the Code of Canon Law for Eastern Churches, which is a document that was just decreed for them by the Pope. So all of these claims, by the way, that like Eastern Catholics tend to make, which is that they're more independent than local dioceses, or that they're more independent than the Latin Church, or what have you, that may be relatively true, right? They may be sort of left alone a little bit more than Latin Catholic churches, but actually they're all governed in accordance, administratively, by the Code of Canon Law for Eastern Churches, which the last few times that it's been changed have all those changes have come about by motu proprio of the Pope, by a special decree from the Pope. So really, Eastern Catholic churches, while they may have a certain level of independence, are just creatures of the papacy. They are, the Ukrainian Catholic Church is not the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in communion with the Pope. That's not true. The Ukrainian Catholic Church is governed by rules, governed by law, enabling law that is directly, signed off on, directly amended by papal decree through, by the way, a dicastery that's headed up by an Italian. The Dicastery of Eastern Churches, I believe, is the name of it. I believe is the name of the dicastery that's in charge of that particular group of Catholic churches. And of course, they're a tiny minority. So you're talking about, of course, they're governed by a single dicastery, while the rest of the church is governed by several dicasteries. They're governed by one dicastery because they're tiny relative to the whole Catholic Church. So, what do we make of that? If you, like me, were looking for a church that is conciliar in nature, that fundamentally reflects that early apostolic conciliar character, the Eastern Catholic Church just doesn't get you there. You're still directly under the Pope, and all your legislation is directly affected by his, sort of particular motu proprio, decrees, right? Not by any sort of, not mediated by an ecumenical council or by any kind of administrative bureaucracy in between him and you. You're just directly under the Pope. You might as well be a diocese, right? There are differences in the Code of Codes of Canon Law for Eastern Churches and the Code of Canon Law for the Latin Church. Or certainly there are differences in those laws, but they're both determined by the Pope. And if anything, the latest sort of bout of legislation regarding that has been to harmonize the two, so to make them less different from one another. So you can take that how you will. Something else that sort of turned me off from the Eastern Catholic churches was this sort of process of de-Latinization and the liturgical chaos that followed. So for those of you that don't know, whereas the Second Vatican Council was busy dismantling the Roman liturgy, or the Latin Rite liturgy, it also issued a decree saying that the Eastern churches should be more authentic, which would have been a great decree for them to just, tell their own jurisdiction, to tell the Latin Church, just be more authentic. No, that's not what Vatican II generally did, but that's what they did to the East. So they called for this sort of ressourcement for the Eastern liturgies. And practically speaking, what that meant, the Filioque, I believe, was taken out of the Creed. It had been commonly recited in Eastern Catholic churches before that. And it also, removed, I think a lot of Eastern Catholic churches tended to start off Divine Liturgy with rosaries or did Stations of the Cross and that sort of thing. And so de-Latinization, sort of peeled some of that away. And there were also abbreviations in the liturgy that were fairly common before that de-Latinization process. But the result of this de-Latinization was that there was this constant tinkering with the Eastern Catholic liturgy. And so it is not the case that if you go to an Eastern Orthodox church and then you go to an Eastern Catholic church, that the liturgies will be, the same. They will be based on the same text, and they will be fairly similar or relatively similar. But there will be differences, or there will likely be differences, unless you're at an Eastern Catholic church that is sort of conscientiously trying to be a little more Orthodox. The best example I can think of is that in Melkite churches. So I'm Antiochian Orthodox, for those of you that don't know. But in the corresponding Catholic jurisdiction, the Melkite Catholic Church, you often have an omission of one of the two antiphons at the beginning of Divine Liturgy, and a corresponding omission of the little litanies between them. And you, in fact, even have the little entrance sometimes during the Justinian hymn, the Only Begotten Son, and so forth. So, there was this constant tinkering with the Divine Liturgy that happened in East and continues to happen in Eastern Catholic churches. And why? Well, because like Vatican II did with everybody else, it sort of kicked off this idea that the liturgy is something legislated rather than something that grows organically like it does in the Orthodox Church. And I would also say that de-Latinization in and of itself reflects a different perspective on liturgy than what I've ever heard from an Orthodox scholar. Orthodox would kind of expect that, if you went from one patriarchate to another, so, for example, if you were primarily using Slavic usage and you were under the Russian Patriarchate, and then you switched to the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, Orthodoxy would expect for the liturgy to sort of somewhat reflect that change, right? To slowly sort of adopt the customs and the patterns of your chief hierarch, or at least of the customs of similar groups under your chief hierarch, under your patriarch. We would expect a rite to grow closer to its leader. So it's not, even from an Orthodox perspective, I'm not even sure that de-Latinization or that Latinization of the Eastern Catholic liturgies is that much of a problem. If they were, in fact, Orthodox and not Catholic, we wouldn't really be all that surprised if a Eastern Rite Catholic Church under the Patriarchate of Rome, if it liturgically developed to be closer to the Roman liturgy. That would be kind of a common theme. I mean, it certainly happened in the Byzantine world, where churches like the Antiochian Church slowly switched from a Syriac rite to the Byzantine rite as it drew closer to the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And in the same way, and I'm trying to think of the other example that I thought of, but Georgia. Georgia had its own sort of version of the Syriac rite, I believe. I may be wrong about that, but I believe it was the Syriac rite. And again, went over as it drew closer to Moscow, and as its patriarchate fell closer and closer uh, into the Byzantine world. It adopted the Byzantine rite, and so there was a liturgical change there to reflect the ecclesiological change. So it wouldn't be surprising that there would be Latinizations in, say, the Ukrainian Catholic Church from an Orthodox perspective. And it wouldn't be inauthentic. I'll correct myself there. It wouldn't be inauthentic for that to be so. The liturgies should represent the church, right? It's not just some kind of thing that we play with and decide which liturgy we like better today. It's something that reflects a reality. So, we also know that when there were schisms in the church, these were often reflected in liturgical changes in the church. So increasingly the Byzantine rite became the rite of orthodoxy, right? It slowly became the only one. And as other churches sort of broke off, they sort of maintained their own liturgy. And then slowly the Byzantine liturgy coalesced around one single rite. So, it's certainly also happened in the Latin rite, where you had, schisms of the old Catholics. They developed their own liturgical praxes, although much closer to the Latin liturgy because of the shorter amount of time and the closeness. Or the Anglican Church, developed its own liturgy after its schism from the Catholic Church. So, delatinization as a project and liturgical tinkering, that's just something that's stereotypically Catholic, and it's precisely the sort of thing I wasn't looking for in a church when I started looking. So that's another reason why I didn't go for Eastern Catholicism. Finally, and this is something that came after I had decided to convert, because I'd already decided to visit Orthodox churches when the motu proprio that limited the traditional Latin Mass came out. So I was already thinking about going Orthodox. But shortly after the motu proprio came out, an Eastern Catholic priest came on YouTube and said, "Hey, if you're upset by these changes, well, stay in communion with the church. Just come over and go to an Eastern Catholic church. You'll get traditional liturgy and traditional values. You won't have to worry about it." And this is kind of the Eastern Catholic project. I mean, historically speaking, right? The Eastern Catholic project thus far has primarily consisted of sort of trying to draw in people who wanted to maintain a certain liturgical tradition, but also wanted to be in communion with Rome, or for political reasons wanted to draw closer to the Roman Church, or they wanted the protection, or they didn't like how some colonial overlords were treating them. Whatever the history is there, the tendency of the Eastern Catholic Church has been to kind of use their liturgy and their liturgical distinctiveness to draw in people. And that doesn't strike me as being, overly concerned with the church having its own identity. Because in my opinion, the Eastern Catholic Church really doesn't have its own identity relative to Eastern Orthodoxy today. And that's another aspect of this. When I was speaking with Eastern Catholics, and when I was sort of thinking about Eastern Catholicism and trying to find my way, there's the baby again. Maybe you can hear her, maybe you can't. But maybe we'll pause for a second. Okay, I'm back. So another aspect of sort of looking into Eastern Catholicism, and as I was sort of exploring it, I realized that a lot of what Eastern Catholics drew on was from Eastern Orthodox sources. And that sort of leaves you at an interesting point because they continue to draw on Eastern Orthodox sources. It's often the case that you'll find an Eastern Catholic with like the old Rite Orthodox prayer book, or even Jordanville, or maybe with a reference to the Pope penciled in. They often rely on Orthodox sources. Their liturgy, especially their liturgical calendar, has often been updated to sort of correspond more closely to Eastern Orthodox feasts. But ultimately, if you become Eastern Catholic, you're cut off from the contemporary sources for Eastern Orthodoxy. I mean, St. Paisios, St. Porphyrios of Kapsokalivia, St. Hieronymus Mikroiananitis, St. St. Nectarius of Egina. Like none of them would have, considered, oh, it's all right, you're Catholic and you're following me. That's just fine. No, that wouldn't have been their perspective. So, whenever you become Eastern Catholic, you may be Eastern in your liturgical practice to a certain extent, but you're under the Western Church and you're cut off from all the contemporary Eastern traditional, Eastern spiritual, traditions, Eastern spiritual teaching. And I think that's really sad. I think that's an unfortunate way to be. And so I didn't want to cut myself off from those contemporary sources of Eastern Christianity by becoming Eastern Catholic. So, and again, that's not saying that the Eastern Catholics don't have anything to say about, Eastern Christianity in general. I'm not saying that. But it is the case that the vast majority of Eastern Christians and the vast majority of people that Eastern Christians would consider saints in the last 200 years certainly wouldn't have had any dealings with Catholicism. So that was another thing that ultimately led me to the Eastern Orthodox Church as opposed to the Eastern Catholic Church. All right, so those are my thoughts on Eastern Catholicism. Again, I don't really mean to be, attacking Eastern Catholics. It's just the perspective that I had as I went through my journey. And, other people going through the same journey might come to different conclusions. And I want to say I completely respect that. We all have to make our spiritual journeys. And just to say that, my arguments are not the end all be all of Eastern Catholic versus Eastern Orthodox arguments. They're just, again, things that affected me and made me come to the decision that I ultimately chose to follow.